It is 50 years of Beaumont history, 1900 to 1950. In microcosm, it shows how a wealthy Southeast Texas family lived in the first half of the 20th century. The McFaddens were a family that came to Texas from Tennessee, first in the 1820s, and they settled in this part of Texas, far east, southeast Texas, in 1833. They had cattle, and later on they began to acquire land to put this cattle on. When oil was discovered in this area in 1901, it brought the McFaddens a lot more money than they had already had. They were already pretty comfortable in their own right, but when oil was discovered in this area, the land that the Lucas Gusher, the original well, was on, plus a lot of the land that was subsequently drilled upon and successfully belonged to the McFadden family, because they had spent so many years accumulating all that pasture land for their cattle, and it was right in the middle of where the oil was found. Just the whole area profited so much from the oil. William McFadden was a tough man. Some people even called him ruthless, because his life was built around acquiring as many cattle and as much land as he possibly could. He didn't have a lot of education. It was said he really couldn't read or write, unlike his father James, who came from Tennessee. But the educational facilities in Texas were slim and none. There just were not many places to have school, even though they periodically tried to have one in this area. Ida McFadden was the wife of William Perry Herring McFadden, who was William McFadden's son. And William Perry Herring, we call him WPH, married Ida. He himself was a widower with 3 children. And Ida actually first came to Beaumont. She was from West Virginia, a very prominent West Virginia family. And she had gone to school in Virginia with a girl from Beaumont. And she came down to Beaumont to visit the friend. She had also been told by a doctor she had throat trouble. And he said, "Oh, the dry air in Texas will help you," not knowing that the air in Southeast Texas is anything but dry with our humidity here. So she came down to visit her friend, and in the process met WPH, who was kind of a dashing widower. He was about 16 years older than she was, but still, you know, very handsome. And they fell in love and got married. This house is perfect for entertaining because all of the public rooms on the first floor open into the central hall. And big houses like that were just perfect for someone like Ida, who was very social, loved to entertain. And so they had many, many large parties here, you know, receptions and teas where several hundred people circulated through. We're standing in the dining room right now, and this was the formal dining area, of course. And it was decorated in a colonial revival style, which allowed the McFaddens to show off a lot of their fine pieces, because there's a plate rail that runs all the way around the room, and it holds some of the fine silver or crystal or whatever they wanted to display at that time. Plus the vitrines that we have in here and the sideboards also provide more space. I would definitely describe this furniture as ornate. The fabric in the upholstery is a brocade, and it is definitely heavily carved, as is much of the furniture in the McFadden home. Everything in this house is original to the McFadden family. We did not go out and buy things that were just true to the period. These were things that the McFaddens had. They saved them. Mrs. McFadden purchased them maybe, Mrs. Ward purchased them, and when Mrs. Ward died, the house was frozen in time, and it was with these possessions that the house became a museum. We're coming into the master bedroom, the bedroom that Ida and WPH McFadden shared. We have interpreted it as after his death, though, in 1935. And we kind of call it Command Central because Ida was so active in civic and charitable and social work. Plus, after all her brothers died, she became the president of her father's company in Huntington, West Virginia. She remained very busy all of the rest of her life. These are members of Ida's family mostly, including her children. The large picture in the center was made in 1894 when she and WPH got married, and The people on the back row, it's Ida and WPH on the left, and then Ida's sister Weta and her husband, Bernard Pratt, on the right, and Ida's maiden name was Caldwell. And so these are members of the Caldwell family. And along the bottom are Ida's children. That's Perry Jr. on the left, Mamie in the middle, the woman who donated the museum, created the museum, and Caldwell, the youngest son. We're standing in the third floor billiard room, and it was built as a billiard room, and the table has actually been here since before the house was completed. We don't really know how it came to be here. It is a single piece. It does not break down. I don't think there would have been any cranes tall enough in Beaumont at that time to have lifted it through the front. We have heard that it was lifted up through a flue, a hole that was left in the center of the house, and that the hole was later closed up. And that's as good an explanation as any. But this was a game room, and when the two McFadden boys, Perry and Caldwell, got to be teenagers, they moved up to this third floor, and it became a man space. And one of the domestic employees years later recalled that they had parties up here, and they would bring their friends up here. So we have recreated it as their entertainment area, and also as a workspace for Mr. McFadden, because we've left his desk here as it was when we found it. Well, we're coming into the kitchen of the McFaddin-Ward House, and this was sort of the area where the domestic employees gathered a lot of times, because they could eat all three meals here. They would eat the same meals that the McFaddens had and just eat them in the kitchen. But the kitchen was actually sort of reigned over by a cook named Louis Lemon. He had been the McFadden's cook for 37 years. And he did not really like a lot of visitors in his kitchen. He tolerated the other employees there when they came to eat. But if people came and invaded his kitchen too much, he had been known to put red peppers in the burners of the stove. He lived in the carriage house in his rooms until he died. It was said that Mrs. McFadden knew she could host any party from the size of a huge banquet to fixing breakfast for Mr. McFadden before he went out on the ranch, and knew that Louis could do it. Communications in a house this big could have been problematic because of the sheer size, but they did have what was state-of-the-art communications then. If you'll look on the wall up high here, there is an annunciator box, and there is a corresponding button in all of the rooms. For instance, if Ida wanted to summon one of the domestic employees for them to come up to her room, she would punch the button in her room. The corresponding arrow to that room would drop as a bell sounded, and the domestic employee would know he needed to go up to Ida's bedroom and see what she needed. The McFaddens were demanding employers, but they did pay above average wages, and they had many ways of taking care of long-time employees, such as paying medical bills, paying funeral expenses, helping them out in other ways. One of the longtime employees, whose name was Albertine Parker, she said they were good to you, but you didn't go there to sit down. Mamie Mcfadden was Ida and WPH's oldest child, their only daughter. And Mamie grew up, of course, in the house. She was about 11 when they moved here. And she loved this house. And when she married Carol Ward, they came back here to live. The house was big enough, presumably, for everyone. And Carol lived the rest of their lives in this house. When Mamie began to get older, she worried about this house. She didn't want it to begin to look shabby or be broken up into apartments or turn into a funeral home, as so many of the other grand houses in Beaumont had done. And she even considered demolishing it. But several friends prevailed on her to try to figure out a way to keep it, and she ultimately established a foundation that would administer it, and she even created a board of directors so that the minute she died, it became a museum. It encompasses so much of what has gone on in this town and in this country and the state for the past 100 years, and it's a wonderful vehicle to show people this. The visual impact It's just how you get them here. And then after that, you can talk to them about the history.